Donald Trump says the U.S. will work closely with Iran with tariff and sanctions relief on the table after both sides agreed to a 2-week truce. And U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. has achieved decisive military victory over Iran, adding that Tehran's missile program has been effectively destroyed.
You see, had Iran refused our terms, the next targets would have been their power plants, their bridges, and oil and energy infrastructure. Targets they could not defend and could not realistically rebuild. It would have taken them decades, and we were locked and loaded. They couldn't defend against it. President Trump had the power to cripple Iran's entire economy in minutes, but he chose mercy.
And for more analysis on this 11th-hour ceasefire with Dr. H A Hellyer, who is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense, joining us live from Cairo. Now, Dr. Hellyer, as we've heard, both sides are claiming victory with this 2-week pause. Who is in a stronger position now, the U.S. or Iran?
Thank you very much for having me. So that all depends on what you're comparing to. Iran, before this war, did not enjoy the same effective control over the Strait of Hormuz that it does right now. So that's something that's new for Iran. At the same time, while that might be a strategic accomplishment, Iran's capacities are severely degraded because of the onslaught of American and Israeli strikes. When it comes to the United States certainly took out hundreds of targets in Iran. So there's no question about that. But they didn't lay that out as their criterion for victory. They wanted, quote unquote, regime change. They wanted Iran to submit to American demands. It has not. There hasn't been regime change. So it's all a question of what you're comparing to and also what constitutes victory according to the parties themselves. The Iranians simply wanted to survive this, and they have.
Now, meanwhile, as the ceasefire is holding, the Gulf nations and Iran are also reporting fresh attacks against them just hours after the truce. Is the ceasefire holding, or do you think it's already starting to break down?
Well, in the early hours of any ceasefire, there's always going to be certain discrepancies. We've seen that multiple times over the years. I wouldn't call it quits just yet. I think that there's a very good chance that this is going to hold. The question is how long it holds and how it develops. But the Iranians have made it very clear that they're sending negotiators. The Americans are pronouncing all sorts of statements that make it clear that they think that this is going to hold. So I think that we have to hope that this is going to go further. Of course, that's little consolation in the very short term for the Gulf, because, of course, it was the Gulf Arab states that suffered the brunt of Iranian reprisals. It wasn't the Israelis, it wasn't the Americans that suffered the brunt of it. It was the UAE, it was Saudi, it was Bahrain, it was Qatar, it was Kuwait, it was Oman, it was the Gulf Arab states, which had not wanted this war in the first place and had lobbied very hard against it. So I think that that's going to be of little consolation to them, and they're going to be looking forward to seeing how a new regional security architecture can be built that is going to protect them against attacks like this in the future.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned Iran's strategic win. There are reports that Iran could impose fees or also conditions on shipping. Does that effectively give Tehran new leverage over global oil flows?
So yes and no, in the sense that, of course, the Iranians could decide to create havoc in the Strait of Hormuz again. But it would be very dubious for them to try to do so in quote-unquote peacetime conditions, right? Same thing for the Houthis, for example, in Bab el-Mandeb. They have the capacity and the capability to act as pirates, but if there's not a war going on, then it becomes difficult for them to justify that even internally. So I think what the Iranians are looking to do is to try to formalize their control using this quote-unquote tariff toll system. The Omanis have already said that they're not going to be a part of this. And of course, one of the proposals that was going around is that the Iranians would take a fee on one side and the Omanis, quote unquote, on behalf of the GCC on the other. The Omanis already said, we're not doing that. Of course, in the last hour or so, you've seen reports that Trump has been saying that they're investigating the possibility of doing this with the Iranians, i.e. a U.S.-Iranian arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz, which again is rather dubious to think of. So we have to wait and see what people are going to allow in terms of formalization. I think the Gulf will push back very hard against the idea that Iran's role in the strait ought to be formalized. This is an international shipping lane. It's not comparable, for example, to the Suez Canal, which was constructed by Egypt and is maintained by Egypt. This is an international shipping lane and ought to remain as such.
Yeah. And speaking of that path forward, then, Islamabad is hosting US-Iran talks on Friday. Why Pakistan? And what do you think these talks can tangibly achieve?
Well, Pakistan, because Pakistan managed to do it, right? I mean, you had Pakistan, Egypt, the Turks, and the Saudis get together and try over the last month to find some sort of pathway to beginning a discussion around a ceasefire. The Pakistanis put in a lot of effort. So did the Egyptians. I don't think a lot of attention is being given to the Egyptian role in this regard. I'm not saying that because I'm in Cairo today. I think this is being reported. The Turks as well. Okay, and also the Saudis. The Saudi role has not been really made entirely clear. They were part of the quartet, and I think that they had a very significant role, but it hasn't been made public, or where details haven't been made public yet. But it's quite reasonable that it would be in Islamabad, considering the amount of engagement that took place from the Pakistanis. And in terms of what we can hope to see, again, this is really early days. You know, people are talking about the ceasefire as though it's something that's really solid. This is a pause in the fighting, which hasn't even fully begun yet. As you noted, there are still some residual strikes that are taking place in the Gulf. Also, the Israelis are still pounding Lebanon. The Israelis invaded Lebanon, occupying territory, and they continue to do so. It's the other main destabilizing power in the region, arguably more so than the Iranians on multiple fronts. And of course, is at the ICJ on genocide charges. So this isn't a situation that is entirely stable yet, but it's certainly on a path that is more positive than it was 24 hours ago, particularly when the American president talked about, basically destroying the Iranian civilization and unfortunately engaging in that sort of genocidal rhetoric himself. We shouldn't normalize this sort of talk. We shouldn't dismiss it as, flamboyant or anything like that. No, it's highly dangerous and should be called out by all statesmen everywhere.
Yeah, Dr. Hellyer, thank you so much for your perspectives. I've been speaking with Dr. H A Hellyer, who is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence.